Humans are what we might call a very special kind of animal. There's only one that we know of. And this kind of animal, unlike others, has kind of multiple modes of speciation, and most of them aren't physical. So it's as if it shunts some of its evolutionary momentum into cognitive domains, relational domains, technological domains, ideological domains, and heuristic domains, or intellectual domains, learning domains, formal learning domains. So this is a really weird kind of animal, and we're the only one of those around here. And the one technology that we really don't know hardly anything about is the one from which all the others spring. In other words, we don't know much about representational cognition, the stuff we use to know. And it's ironic that rather than learning about the foundations of our abilities and the dangers of our abilities as representational animals, we kind of fall down into all the different branches of what that can become, as if there's a gravity down there that keeps us from developing our foundational skills and seeing their true opportunities and dangers, and keeps us fascinated with one branch of derivatives or another. And we're not only fascinated with those branches, we become them. We actually act them out. We live them. We live them out. We form minds based on them. And this is a really peculiar and dangerous property. If you just look at life on Earth as though you weren't from here, which is fairly easy for most of us to imagine, you can see that there's a war on Earth between the formally representational cognitive animal and every other life form on Earth and every other community of life on Earth. And those animals also attack themselves. And what's the kind of final capping irony is that they attack the basis of their own intelligence with the results of their intelligence, rather than developing their own intelligence and the foundational faculties and skills and assets that are the nature of our human birthright. We acquire habits and imperatives that cause us to consistently assault them with their own extensions. In case you're wondering, like, well, what would a good analogy of that be? There's lots of crazy ones. One would be like if your index finger decided that it should rule all of humanity and all of life on Earth and just started attacking anything that didn't look like an index finger, including you, right? That's one analogy. But there's another analogy that we're all very familiar with. If you've ever had an inflammation, or if you've ever had an allergy or any kind of immune disorder, then you know that it's possible for your body to become confused about what comprises itself and what comprises something else, so that the parts of your body that defend yourself from dangerous intruders begin attacking your body's own systems, so that your defenders are attacking you. Now, if you weren't, if you wanted a similar analogy, you could just look at the situation with what we call law enforcement and policing in the United States. You can see that the aspect of the analogical, right, the analogy, or our culture is, if we take it as the analogy of a body, the aspect that represents the immune system is not only attacking its own members and is itself terrifyingly corrupt, it attacks itself too. It's also, one of its extended members is attacking not just random other enclaves of people on Earth, but life itself on Earth, attacking life itself. In fact, just to test the military technologies that we use, we have to wipe out whole ecosystems, and we don't count that, interestingly enough. Apparently we think that the ecosystems and us are two separate things, which is much like the index finger thinking that it's separate from you. And of course it is separate in a way, but not in the way that anything will survive if it starts attacking you, or itself. So we can see that the representational animal is incredibly confused, and that instead of developing and understanding the foundational powers and faculties and their dangers and opportunities, we've gotten very excited about what we can make and do and think and see with them. So excited that we'll make and do and see anything at all that's possible. Atomic bombs, weapons of unimaginable destruction that masquerade as benefits. Anything you can imagine, we're happy to make billions of them, just because we can. And the only costs that we account for are representations of costs, money. And since animals and living places, children, women, families, are humanity, since those don't appear in bank accounts, you can wipe those out, turn them into money, and pretend they never existed. You can also blame the people you stole them from. It's a fascinating process. But I want to get at something kind of interesting here. One of the dangers of our representational heritage is that we can get a really wrong idea about what things are. Language and habits of thinking can cause us to grossly misunderstand the identity of some of the phenomenon and beings and situations that we find ourselves not only immersed in, but emerging from and acting upon. And so there are some root ideas in what I call a metonymic web. And a good metonymic web will produce sustainable, self-educating superfunction. A bad metonymic web will cause everything to break down and intelligence to attack itself and just about everything else that moves. Basically, we don't have any good metonymic webs left. And even the things that used to sustain these webs have become corrupt, so that we would have to reassemble them together to have any chance of knowing what it's like to be a formal representational animal with a relatively dependable metonymic web underneath your language, so that your sense of identity couldn't be easily corrupted or, how shall we put it, mimicked, counterfeited. And one of the primary organs in the human metonymic web is, what is an animal? Right? So if you've got a really crude or bad or wrong or fake idea or abstract idea about what an animal is, turns out you can't have the right idea about anything at all. Every other idea you make will be broken in more ways than the idea that the bad idea that you have about the animal is broken. Because the idea of animal is multiply folded into every other idea. To know what ideas are, you have to be an animal. See how it works? So whatever you think an animal is part of what you think you are. It's part of what you think thinking is. If you got the wrong idea about what that is, you're not going to be able to think. And language has a structure that we can't see that depends on this feature much more intricately than my somewhat confusing example implies. So, I want to give you just a simple example of how confused we are about what an animal is. And maybe we can get a little bit of correction on this one token in our metonymic web, this one link. For most of our lives, science has told us that you're a human being and you're made of DNA. And evolution is the process whereby, how should we put it, vehicles of DNA are replicated and compete for survival, and the winners get to reproduce, to put it very crudely. And there are some other features of the factual theory, meaning it's not just a theory, it's a fact. It's There's both a theory and an absolute fact that go along with this word. So things absolutely do evolve, and we are not yet entirely clear on what that means. We're still early in the process, and it doesn't tell us what life is. The fact that we notice that life forms evolve doesn't tell us that evolution is what life forms do. Okay? That just happens to be one mechanical process that we managed to get a rigorous grasp on. So evolution definitely doesn't tell us what life forms are or what they do, yet language implies that, and many people think that way, possibly including many scientists. That's completely backwards. It would be a little bit like thinking that writing is what brains do. Libraries are what brains do. Sure, that's a tiny part of what one aspect of brains do, and it's very formal, and you can see there they are, the libraries, right? Brains do that. So it's a fact, but it doesn't mean that that's what brains are, and it doesn't mean that that's what brains do. That's a thing that's correlated with the existence of there being brains. So evolution is correlated with the existence of life forms. It doesn't tell us what they do, since obviously they do a great number of many things, many of which we have failed to even notice, or let alone classify. Evolution is one of the things that is integral to the processes of life as we understand it here, but doesn't define it, so we shouldn't make that mistake. But there's another more interesting feature here that I'd like to point out. In our fascination with the discovery of DNA, and particularly certain kinds of medicines like antibiotics, which we use as what we think of as weapons against disease, unfortunately we overlooked 90% of what animals are. And plants too. And not just animals, but insects and all, fishes and all the forms of life. So if you took a cellular census of your body, and lots of people have heard this, but they don't really think about the significance of it. If you took a cellular census of your body, what you'd find is that approximately 90% of you, 90, isn't human at all. It didn't come from your mother and your father getting together. 90% of you didn't come. In terms of cell numbers, right? Didn't come from your mother and father getting together. 90% of you came from every moment of relation on life, of life on Earth, in the entire history of life on Earth, and wherever it may have come from. 90% of you is that. 10% of you is the animal cells that carry the DNA that science tells you about, and that evolution is focused on. By the way, evolution is ignoring that other 90%. So we might be overlooking something, don't you think? And when they talk about your DNA, well, actually, they're talking about the DNA in the 10% of the animal cells that come from, your mother and father getting together in that moment when the sky and the earth came together, there was lightning, and you were conceived. So we might have the wrong idea what an animal is, since science has had the wrong idea about what we are for a long, long time. And not only has had the wrong idea, but have been presenting 10% as the whole. So if 90% of you isn't human, what is that other 90%? And if, you're 90% something else, we might want to realize that, for example, your brain, that everyone talks about like a computer, that they think they know what it does, and ideas which are ridiculous, by the way, is floating in 90% of something we're not even talking about, and is constantly informed by all that relation, right? So we've been looking at the tiniest part of what it means to be human, or an animal or anything, when, some large percentage, maybe not 90 in all cases, of plants, animals, insects, fishes, crustaceans, snails, everything, right, is bacterial. And what is that bacterial stuff? Well, it's like liquid life. It goes everywhere. You touch someone's hand and you guys exchange it. You kiss and you exchange it, right? Dogs lick you and you get it all in you. And it has a much more rapid evolutionary temporality than us, right? The evolutionary temporality of humans, right, in physical evolution, is extremely slow. I'm not sure what the order of it is. I don't know, tens of thousands of years. Some of the processes are probably a little faster. Some might even happen in a few lifetimes. But for bacteria, the evolutionary clock is ticking at like, I'm going to be a little bit, arbitrary here, but it's something like, I don't know, a year per hour, right? And since there's 350 trillion of them in you, and a year is an hour, your microbial components are evolving at an incomprehensible rate of speed. And everything you touch or eat or don't eat, the sunlight, what you're exposed to, all of these things change very rapidly your microbial populations and their balances, which clearly inform all the other systems in your body, since 90% of the cells aren't animal cells. And if you took the 90% of your bacterial cells away, you'd die really, really quickly. So you wouldn't be able to be human with that 10% of you left. And interestingly, evolution is probably very similar, right? We've got a hold on a very rigorous and astonishing discovery, but we tend to see all of nature through that discovery. Unfortunately, we've been looking only at the germline, right? So if that's 10% of you and 10% of everything, we've probably been trying to see, nature through a lens that is incredibly narrow and inclines us to only see its products wherever we look and dismiss everything else. One of the reasons we dismissed everything else is we couldn't find a vehicle of transmission, right? We couldn't find a vehicle of transmission of traits, or perhaps some assets that didn't involve the germline DNA. But we're swimming in a vehicle that has to be transmitting all kinds of things that probably we don't even have ideas about yet, not just across reproductive gaps, across every kind of gap you can imagine, including species gaps, right? You can acquire commensal bacteria from contact with a wasp, or the dirt, or a dog, or an object that a raccoon brushed against. And those commensal bacteria, the ones that survive in the ecosystem of your body, will become your own, inform your own, replicate, change with your populations, and so on. So we probably have the wrong idea about what an animal is. And since that's one of the most central ideas to all of our other ideas, it's kind of subtly included so that if you got the wrong idea, you're going to get the wrong idea about everything. And if you don't know what an animal is, you won't know what anything is. Since animals, of course, like us, make concepts. We're really a lot more confused than we think. And all of our scientific advancement and all of our technological advancement is incredibly deceptive, because we failed to even moderately advance the underlying faculties that would make those useful to us. And instead, by doing so, we've made them dangerous. We're using a tiny, highly articulate tool in a world that we don't understand and become blind to, because the tool we now see the world through the tool rather than through the eyes of intelligent, relational, human-animal beings. Now, there's a lot of other ways that we don't understand what an animal is. But interestingly, we've just been playing with an idea that can help us correct what an organism is, what an insect is, what a fish is, what a snail or a slug is, what a plant is, and what a human being is. Even what a mind is, because I guess we thought that minds were things that are made of human cells. Well, it's not entirely untrue, but since they're floating in a bath and intimately relating with what we might as well imagine as an alien life form, billions of years old, it's not exactly the way we thought. Most of the ideas that we have, ideas about what the sun is, what light is, what time is, what it means to have eyes or minds or hands, are similarly, they've been similarly denuded of many dimensions of obvious factual meaning and identity and qualities that we need to retrieve if we're to have the hope of becoming intelligent together. And no one's going to help us with this, so the task falls to us. We have to become the pioneers ourselves, do the work ourselves, learn and teach and discover and correct and explore in the most sober manner possible together. Hopefully we've had a moment of that here today, and I want to thank you for spending your time and having the interest to wander through the forests of the origins of the strange faculty of formal representational cognition and the great mystery of why there's only one animal like that we've discovered so far, and what the true implications of that might be and could become if we were able to actually take advantage of it rather than being mostly subject to its dangers and their rather terrifying outcomes.